Coaches, welcome to the Masterclass this evening. I am in beautiful Austin, Texas, and in a hotel conference room, which the Holiday Inn was nice enough to lend me for tonight's Masterclass. I got to remember what I'm doing tonight. Coach, I was wondering, when do you tell your teams to run action offensively as opposed to just playing with pace? Great question. So generally, and Marwan, who's on here, if you want, you can unmute yourself and comment on this because you watched a little bit of it with me today. But generally what we say is that, on misses and on makes, like we're playing. And our general rule is when the ball stops moving, we run a handoff, and that handoff would initiate a quick. And a quick, for those that don't know, is a pinch post action, a random pinch post action in any location. We have the quick offensive concept is on our website, but we would flow from there into offense. Generally on dead balls, we run structure, and meaning we run a set. So we run a set to a specific matchup, an action to a specific matchup. But on live ball stuff, misses or makes, we flow. We try and run two side and explore that early and opposite, and then if not, we flow into quicks. And with quicks, I don't want it to seem like it's not just roll out, obviously, in play. There's a structure to it, and there's some decision-making and sometimes the best matchup stuff to it. But the two-side combined with quicks. And then what I basically started running near the end of last year was on more makes, we ran into wide. And wide is just a ball reversal into a screen away. And it was really just a method of getting entry to the high post into quicks. So that makes sense. I can show some video a little bit later, Zach, but hopefully that helps in terms of understanding. But our basic concept is when stuff stops, we run a handoff, and that gives us time to figure it out. And again, remember, we have a 24-second shot clock, but usually once we've initiated some type of handoff, it can be guard to guard, big to guard, guard to big, doesn't matter. But that gives us time for that quick, that designated player that's going to flash to the quick spot to be able to flash. And then that initiates from there. We initiate in the corner or 45 screen, which are both edits on the quick offensive concept and out of the wide offense. You can see both those actions. Next question. Yeah, I can't hear you, Mark. So just type it. Type it, dude. I'm happy to answer it that way. Maybe your mic or something's wrong there, but okay, Coach Batista. How can you get buy-in from a coach above you to grow their basketball knowledge? Wow. Again, Zach, maybe you want to comment on this too, but how can you get Hugo, perfect too. How do you want to get people how do you want people above you to buy into some of your philosophy is basically what you're saying. And if some of you have been assistant coaches recently, this might be something to comment on as well. But the basic concept here is everything is a sales job. Everything that you're doing with your players and everything you're doing if you're an assistant for your head coach, everything is a sales job. And I've seen this recently. I've seen some presentations that teams produce. Teams basically put together PowerPoints for their team to sell them on the way they want to play. So my first suggestion might be to be able to start with some type of structure, and that might be a PowerPoint. It might be sitting them down and have some type of video session with them. Make it very open, make it non-aggressive and non-confrontational. Make it again, this open environment where you say, hey coach, I'd just like to have a discussion with you about something. Would you be open to that? And then let them know the topic, and then let them know that you have a video or you have some type of presentation that you want to walk them through. There's a Division I assistant coach that I talked to recently that presented the dribble drive offense to his head coach as this viable thing. And it was essentially the same thing, that he put together this presentation, and this presentation helped guide the coach's thinking. And whether they adapted or not, that was the idea. So I would start from a framework, and then from there evolve it into, hey, if you want to have more conversations about it, I can direct you to some resources, or I can direct you to a podcast, or I can put together more to be able to help you. And I think generally anyone like whether it's a JV to varsity coach or assistant to head coach, it's one of those situations that I think anyone in a position of leadership who wants the best for their team would be willing to and open to listen. The key part of that is, would that that work needs to be done for them. Like if I go to a head coach and say, listen, hey, go research this, it's not happening probably. But if I go to them with all the research and all the evidence behind it and support, then I've done the work for them. They're going to be more open-minded about that. So I think that's a great thing. Hopefully that helps. And that's a starting point, coach, to be able to do that. But I would put together some easy resources for them to be able to check and follow through with. Okay, Hugo, why the handoff? So the handoff doesn't have to happen, Hugo. It's just, again, the handoff before the quick is only when the ball stops. So we generally know, and if you watch the video, you can see our players, when it becomes 5-on-5 and there's no opportunity to be able to, say, drive gaps or to be able to keep the ball moving to advantage, then the quick can happen. What I'm saying is if the quick player isn't immediately there, one of the ways to cue them within our system is to run a handoff. And it becomes just, again, a movement of the defense prior to the quick, but it also gives time for the timing of the quick to be able to come and be able to come up to it. So that's what we mean by that. That that handoff is really just a cue, and sometimes the quick might forget that they're coming up in terms of that. So, Marwan, did you figure out a way to type in here? I'm just going down the list here. Okay, here's another one. Building on that, have you found that sometimes the quick is denied? Have you struggled with that? Absolutely. I mean, some teams deny it. I would say very, very rarely did we experience that as a problem. That's why we did go to more the wide, which is on more, not on live balls. I didn't find we had much difficulty in wide balls. What is more the problem with denial is where you catch, the catch location. Like if we're trying to catch it as deep as possible to the high post or through the elbows, then sometimes we would get forced higher. But we designated that the action changed based on where the ball was caught. If the ball was caught really high, then there was a tendency to be able to run more ball side action rather than, again, go across and run the 45 screen, if you're familiar with that. But the other part that goes with it as well is that versus denial, I mean, ideally you can get that situation where you can cut and bring the cut high enough to be able to set up a back door. We would get that occasionally. You know, while the player's cutting back door, you can also look to the weak side skip. That was another possibility because someone would help in on the back door. Then you'd have a skip possibility with that. And then the other possibility is obviously to be able to set up something in terms of just a set action to be able to exploit teams that be able to, you know, deny. But sorry, another thing is when we caught the high post catch, the quick high, we would often initiate immediately into what we call buffalo, which is just the end of European ball screen on the second side. So instead of waiting for the person, say the point guard entered to the quick, instead of waiting for them, we would just initiate immediately European ball screen action to the two side. And hopefully that makes sense. But again, that's on the quicks, the edit of the quicks that I shared.
Hey, Coach, this is Marwan. Can you hear me now?
I didn't share today, but I talked with some coaches today about so. Defensively, how should players decide if the high or low guy should be in or out on the weak side? Coach, this is philosophy. This is designated by you. That I've seen some NBA teams say that they're going to tag with the high player. I've seen some NBA teams tag with the low player. But this is all based on you and your philosophy. We would almost always have the low player in, that the low player would be in and the high player would be out. And we just felt that that gives better help at the rim. It gives better protection at the rim on drive. But mainly our philosophy was to tag with the low player. So essentially that solves all of that. So interesting. So let me just see for some reason. Some of you are saying you can hear Marwan, but I can't. Okay, I don't know why that's happening. Anyways, not important. He typed in a question, so that's all good. We can solve that right now. So okay, I'm just reading it here. Ball screening. How can you build a player's skill set on the ball screen? We have a skilled point guard who struggles to play with appropriate pace on screens. Any suggestions on developing a player's ability to play ball screen? You know, I mean, the simple answer is just, again, to run constant ball screen actions within your practice. But clearly, most of it has to do with getting them to understand, like all learning is a conscious process initially, where we've got to make them consciously aware of what they're doing. So it could be some isolated film on them in practice, where they're using ball screen to help them to understand their pace and their problems with pace. And maybe, again, covering that relative to someone who, a model, probably someone in the NBA that uses pace probably a little bit better to be able to show, kind of demonstrate, here's pace in a positive example, here's pace in a negative example, here's what you're doing, and here's the problems can come from it. So I think that's first a video example to be able to explain and demonstrate an understanding. Sit down with a number of video examples from that. And then the second is just how hard are you going to coach him on this within practice? As I said, we've got to make him consciously aware of it. So every time he doesn't play with the proper pace or he doesn't get to shoulders, whatever that may be, then you need to coach him on that every time he does it. Every time he doesn't do it, you need to stop it. You need to ask a question or you need to communicate. And then you need to reconnect him with what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. So it's like, okay, foul, hey, John, what do you think I stopped it for? Or, hey, John, you didn't get to the shoulder. Hey, John, you did a great job, with getting to the shoulder. However, your pace was way too fast to be able to make a decision. That kind of keep and add something, kind of philosophy of feedback. So different ways like that to be able to point it out and stop it. But you got to stop it. Like, he's not going to get better if you don't stop it every time he does it wrong. And that's where you put him in a ton of situations within practice where you can coach it. And then as we've talked about many times, you need to have that agreement with him that you can coach him. And I think that comes with pre-care, aftercare, talking to him before practice, talking to him after practice, and then noticing progress, where you constantly notice his progress about when he's doing it better or when he's doing it well. And that's part of it as well. So I think that's a key part of that. And hopefully that helps. Coach Batista, do you want players to try and steal from a ball handler? If so, do you teach it, and how do you teach it? I would argue no. We've always said steals come off the ball, they don't come on the ball. The pressure on the ball is what leads to steals off the ball. Now, saying that, sometimes you'll get steals on the ball because your player is just, again, pressuring the ball. But generally, what's happening is that you're just putting that offensive ball handler in a more difficult situation so that they're more likely to turn it over on the pass. Now, sometimes the steal on the pass can come from the player on the ball, just with that defensive pressure, as I said. But mostly it comes from off the ball situation where someone off the ball is, again, anticipating or in an advantageous situation because of the ball pressure. So no, we don't try and steal. Yes, we try and disrupt. Cool. Jason, defensively, when you switch all screens 1 to 5, what are your key teaching points? Well, again, so many teaching points, depending on where the screen location is. And Jason, this is me skipping that, but if you haven't watched the 10 video breakdown yet, 10 defense breakdown, then there are some different examples relative to that. Whether it's a side screen, where it's a single down screen or it's a stagger screen or different things like that. It would vary it in terms of what we would emphasize, I guess, in terms of those teaching points. But the basic points are that the receiver of the cutter, so the player switching out onto the cutter, can't leave early and that the player who's receiving the screener has to get to the inside of the screener and stay below the screener. So it becomes, I know a lot of coaches talk about talk it, touch it. Talk it, absolutely. Touch it is not always the reality, because we don't always want the player receiving the screener to run above their check that they're going to receive, because that obviously opens up a slip. But both players have to get to what we call help position. But for one of them, the player covering going to receive the screener, we want them to be in extreme help, meaning we want them to get to the inside. They can't be at any point on the outside or even in line with the player that they're going to receive, who's the screener, because that just gives up slips. And the slip's the real danger there more than anything. But also, if there's any type of recut or a forced curl, then it can be a switchback as well, or a veer. The player defending the cutter, we would generally do what we call chase gap. Chase gap, that they fake like they're chasing, but ultimately, as they get closer to the screen, they're moving to the inside to the gap. And this chase gap concept we found pretty effective when we're switching all positions. Obviously, all the other part of that is switching the up-down, which is to any advantage. Any taller player at the basket is able to communicate that they're in, so they're going to take any player coming into the basket, and any player out is going to stay out. So smaller players out, bigger players in. It doesn't always work that way. It doesn't always happen. It doesn't happen effortlessly, but through a lot of practice. So now that you're thinking—
Chris, can you hear me? I'm going to try to add one more thing here.
I've got some live action that I can show you. Maybe I'll make that one of the master classes coming up, where I'll show this video of us defending diamond drill with switching. And I believe I have it on the website, but I also have an updated version as well. So that'll help you see that a little bit more, Jason, and anyone else, because I know this is a common topic. And honestly, at the high school level or even at the college level, there's just so much advantage to switching, so many screens. And honestly, you spend less time on scouting report and all these different things. So it's a great topic. So remind me if I don't bring it up. I think next week we'll do kind of the wide offense as a master class, but remind me if I don't bring it up. Which U Sport team do you suggest watching offensively to learn from, men or women, other than Windsor, of course? Well, Carleton, clearly. I mean, that's probably the boring answer, but they're tremendous. I would say McGill as well. And this is for any coaches that have access to Synergy. I think McGill does a tremendous job. The men, I don't know. I can't really comment on the women's game as much, I'll be honest. I don't get a chance to watch the women's U Sport is Canadian University Sports that don't know. And he's just looking for some Synergy teams to watch. And I don't know them as well in terms of that. But I would say, McGill does a really good job defensively. And obviously Carleton does as well. Offensively, I love the spacing clearly that Carleton plays with, and just those unique things that they do. Calgary ran what you would consider more of a continuity, which I've really got to create an edit, but maybe Hugo, you can help me with that. They create a bit of a continuity to the Portland Trailblazers action. So that's a unique thing too that I think would be interesting to look at. I have to think on that. There weren't a ton of teams, honestly, that I was. Western, Brad Campbell. Yeah, go watch the University of Western and Brad Campbell stuff. Does a really good job. A really, really good offensive coach. Just tremendous. And this year's team was kind of unique too, that it was a little bit different than his traditional teams. Runs a lot of tradition. He runs, a lot of Princeton type actions, and has. I think he has the biggest package of backdoor actions, where he has a lot of set plays to be able to take advantage of teams and backdoors. So the University of Western Ontario coaches, if you're searching on Synergy and you have access. But this year he ran a little bit of two-side, and he let his players kind of a little bit more freedom this year because he had a lot more penetrate and kick and drive and kick opportunities in terms of that. So Coach Hopkins, welcome. I'm not sure where you are in the world, but if you're just joining us, please type in any questions in the Zoom group chat below. And Hugo, get on that, and feel free to share with me anything you see I haven't had a chance really to dive in, but I'm certainly interested to dive into some different types of edits with U Sport teams as well. So yeah, that'd be great to be able to see. So good. Same question on the defensive side. Would you be interesting to hear your thoughts? Which same question, the one about coaching someone on the defense? Oh, teams to watch on the defensive side. So much of the defensive side of the game is really, again, so much of the defensive side is about your philosophy. So to find some like-minded teams defensively would be the number one thing. So, I don't know, Martin, for example, if you have a really good idea of the style that you're going to play defensively, but you've talked about a little bit of the force weak and different things like that. There aren't a lot of examples outside of Carleton. They do it. I believe the Carleton women did it, which might be a really good observation exercise, only because, and I mean this with respect, they're really good, but it might be a little slower in terms of the play they play against, the style they play against a lot. So it might be easier to go see. Again, maybe Hugo, Marwin, add that to your checklist, but Carleton men, Carleton women are the force weak ones to watch. And then otherwise, defensively, trying to think what other teams really impressed me defensively this year in terms of what they did. Yeah, I don't know. There aren't too many. I mean,
hard to think of anybody, again, I guess. I wonder if you can hear me still.
So there's so many good defensive teams. I mean, Fenerbahce was tremendous defensively this year. I have to ask some of my European people maybe what the best teams per synergy. I usually dive into that at some point too, but if you go on synergy, you can see the rankings in the world, per possession defense. Coaches, I apologize if you don't have access to synergy, what we're talking about, but I don't know if different things like huddle and different things like that, you can search teams within your league and see teams that do a really good job defensively, but that would be it in terms of that. So cool, coaches, fire away any questions as we move on. I think I got all the ones that have been asked so far. Really good stuff. Zone offense. Okay, I was looking at the zone offense earlier on the website for an offense versus 1-3-1. So, again, I don't know if we've ever really truly played against extended 1-3-1s. So we've never had anything special. I've talked to a lot of coaches about this, and I will quickly, Coach Batista, I'll quickly try and search my database here. Maybe I can throw a play up there that I like. But on the podcast with Milzchek, I talked to him a little bit about 1-3-1 because he played against. He used it, so he saw what was used against it best. But generally, here's the thing versus 1-3-1. Simple. 4 out and someone at the high post. The player in the high post should be screening, sealing, distorting that middle player. That anytime you can get the ball there, then you essentially create a 2-on-1 or a weak side 2-on-1 or a 2-on-1 at the basket. So I think I've diagrammed that. And if you remind me, Coach, I'll find the diagram of that. But I believe against a 1-3-1, the best thing to do is not to do this traditional. I don't think you should try and get it to the deep corners, by the way. I mean, you get it to the corners after you get it to the high post. So I think there should be an obsession about driving the middle, so driving that middle gap, and then having that post seal, space, or they move it on top and then try and get it to the middle player in the high post and then have them be able to attack and play a little bit from there. Or look, the same principle as any type of pressure. If we get it to the middle, we look opposite. So as soon as you catch it in the middle, you're looking opposite. And then in theory, those two players on the weak side, the low player can cut or hold the corner, but you've created a 2-on-1. Against any zone, if you get it to the high post, you essentially create a temporary weak side 2-on-1 until they rotate and cover. So, oh my gosh. If I was to coach Windsor again next year, what would I do differently? What a great question. this has to be a masterclass. This has to be a masterclass. I mean, let's assume with that I don't have. Let's assume we've improved our roster, but let's assume we haven't added 5 All-Canadians or something like that. We've improved our roster. Then I do have some ideas. And it's been an interesting exercise, I'll be honest, since I'm not directly preparing to coach a team that I know of yet, that I've got all these ideas, I've got all these notes, but it's almost like nothing is very specific. So I think this is great. I'm going to write both these ideas down. If that's cool, Coach, to be able to wait a little bit on that one. And what I'll try and do is I'll try and compile kind of the things that I would add to what we did with the masterclass and the different things in a masterclass. But what would I do with Windsor? That's great. Coach, you're back in Ontario. Awesome. Sadly, I'm not there right now. I'm in Texas. But how do you organize your camps when you're teaching your BDT and 0 seconds training? Oh, wow. I can post that, Coach. I can send it to you. I can send you an update of what we do in terms of that. But so how do I organize my camps? Well, I would say it's part progressive learning and part throw them in the deep end. And that's basically it, is that it's a combination of things to be able to try and keep them somewhat comfortable and confident, but somewhat off, outside their comfort zone as well. It's trying to blend those things back and forth. And, as someone reminded me today that I probably combine part life skills with it as well, where there's a life skills component to it. But Coach, I can post that. I should do that really for the membership group as well. So that's a great idea. Let me create a quick, I've got it. I just have to put it probably together as a PDF, and I'll share kind of how our camps progress nowadays. But for example, we start our camp with 3 times between the legs. Everyone has a ball, and then we progress into 3-on-2 shooting. And then we reconnect that back to fight for your feet. And then from there, we go into, again, trying to connect it back to the 3-on-2 shooting. And there's kind of this constant attempt to connect the skills with 1-on-1, or to connect these skills with small-sided games. And I definitely talk about BDT in 0 seconds in terms of BDT being mind training and 0 seconds being skills training. So good. Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Marwan, he just explained to me, Coach Rock just explained to me. So if you go on the podcast, Coach Hopkins, you probably listened to it, but it's a long time ago. The podcast I did with Marwan, Marwan, if you can find it quickly, I think everyone can see everyone's questions too. If you can just Google it, throw up the link maybe, throw the link in here. But we talked about it, where we broke down the camp a little bit through that too, because Coach Rock attended my camp in Milwaukee last year, and then we talked about it that way. So, oh yeah, you found it. Awesome. Brilliant. So there you go. So if you want to listen to that one, but I'll write that down as well, just to be able to post PDF of camp outline, because it's changed a little bit for sure. And I will say as well, I never do the same camp. I never do the same camp. And I was talking just with someone about that, and just kind of relating it to a band, relating the concept to a band about doing the same camp over and over again. I just can't imagine doing the same camp over and over again exactly the same way. It'd be like a band playing the exact same playlist the exact same way every single concert. Like I know it. I've seen bands' playlists, and they change the playlist. They change the songs. They may play always their greatest hits, but they're going to mix in some other stuff. And I would say that's the same way that I approach a camp. That I'm trying to mix in things that are unique or interesting to me sometimes that I want to try. Not that much, but mostly things that are necessary for that group of campers and that would help them the most. And again, it's all the same. I've said this constantly. When I approach a camp, whether there's 40 kids or 60 kids or 80 kids, I am trying to meet the needs of the best kids in the camp, not the oldest, the best kids. So there could be a really good 7th or 8th grader. There could be a really good high school player. The best kids in the camp are the ones that I think about constantly to say, what would meet their needs? Because to be honest, the middle and the bottom, like whatever I do, it's going to challenge them. And in some cases, the bottom, no matter what I do, they're not going to be that interested to the point that it's going to help them. But that's the realities of everything. I mean, unfortunately, I don't get to run camps yet where I get 80 engaged, perfect players, and I hope I do at some point. At a high level, how have you structured your postseason assessment of your team's performance so as to figure out as a coach what to focus on in your offseason? Yeah. So this is specific to me as a coach. There's got to be some type of analysis, some type of, nowadays, obviously we have too many numbers. So I was fortunate. The one thing I did have is I had a guy that was really good with the stats and analysis. So he would give me kind of a summary report. But what I always asked him to do, which is similar to what some coaches here, have talked about, is that I got him to produce a report for me. We have a final 8 in Canada, so it was always where did the 8 teams that went to our national championship, where did they rank in different statistical categories? And then trying to find some type of analytic answer to why they were successful. And then possibly what the trends are. And again, like within that, sometimes there's outliers. Like if there's a team like Carleton, which obviously is just dominant, then we wouldn't consider them as much as we would certain other teams, just because sometimes we can't relate to those teams. Like we can't necessarily play the way Golden State could play, but maybe we could relate more to the way Toronto plays, just as an example, depending on what our roster was. So we try to find some commonalities with certain teams and certain trends, and that would help me evaluate and assess our team. And then obviously with a look forward in terms of that. It all starts with your roster too. I mean, in terms of performance, generally you can see based on your roster and all those different things that come from that, where our assessment needs are. And, you always hope that recruiting changes that. But I would say there. How often do you self-scout during the season? Not enough. But again, that was a limitation. I'll be honest, if I'm on an NBA team, I'm hiring someone to self-scout every game. And I don't know what, maybe they do that. Maybe some staffs do that. I'm not sure. But I would self-scout every game. I'm so huge on self-scout. That's such a great thing. So because I never had full-time assistants, I had to make decisions every day about whether I self-scout us, I focus on us, I focus on our players, or I prepare scout. So there was this give and take. And honestly, sometimes we did self-scout over opponent because, I do somewhat believe in that. I believe that, your team can overcome. And certainly the San Antonio Spurs and Coach Popovich, they're and Ben Drew said that when he was on the podcast, said that they really focus just on them until the playoffs. So I think that's a huge thing. And if you can find someone to do that. Now, the other part that I'd throw at you, and I hope to evolve this a little bit for us within this community, is that eventually I hope that you guys can find some people that you don't necessarily know, so they're not your friends, they're not your besties, but you could share video with them to be able to self-scout your team within the season, especially early in the year. Like, Coach Hopkins, you could give yours to Coach Rock, and then, you guys could kind of give a quick, hey, watch it to learn, but also watch it, self-scout, give them some independent feedback. And, so that could be Hugo and Jason on here, or Jeff and someone else. Like, it's all these different things. So I think it's a great idea, and it doesn't have to be an expert. It can just be a peer. It can be a peer. The challenge, and this relates back, I was talking to an NBA assistant coach recently, and this may be relating back to your point, Maron, but he was responsible a little bit for some of the off-season assessments, so some debrief stuff. And what was interesting is when we had this whole conversation, I said to him, kind of all this is useless unless it's someone independent of your team doing it. And of course, he agreed, But he said the problem is they wouldn't trust anyone else doing it because they don't want any of their stuff to get out, so it would have to be this strange thing. And I think that applies to self, if that makes sense, that relates to self-scout in the sense that you kind of need it to be someone that isn't biased in any way. So that's where I think this community could help if we started to have that. And maybe we'll make that an idea that early in the preseason next year, we'll try and connect you with someone, whoever wants to do it, and we'll set up something for you guys. And maybe we'll come up with a form to help guide. But I think that would be outstanding and a great part of this community. If that's a good idea, let me know. And we can work towards that. But that'd be great. I'm trying to think if there's any other questions. Think that self-scout share is a great idea. Fun question. Who's been your favorite person or top 3 on the podcast to talk basketball and why? Let's just assume it isn't you right now, even though we know it is. But wow. I should be set up for this answer. It's kind of like when someone asks you your top, I don't know if people ask you anymore, your top 3 albums on a desert island, if there's no albums anymore, your top 3 shows, your top 3 this. I don't know. I'm not real good at that stuff, but podcast for me, definitely Andrea Trecciarini. I knew who he was, so I guess I was a little bit more romanticized by who he was and kind of his story and everything. But I knew also he was a bit of a savant, a bit of a genius. And it was everything I wanted in terms of that he just, I think his passion for basketball shone through as much as his tactical. But I think it was that. Steve Donahue was really cool for me in the sense that I think that was the tipping point to a certain extent about when the podcast got full geekdom going on basketball. Because I still remember the point where Steve Donahue stopped and said, I think this is getting too technical. And then I got to tell him, wait, coach, this is the time you can. And then from there, I thought he really dove deep into some of the cutting. And I think that was the whole point of the podcast, where it was this one topic like cutting, which essentially became full deep dive on that. And then, I'm sure there's, the easy answer, obviously Stan Van Gundy's and stuff like that. But I really enjoyed, different ones. I'm a little biased, but the one with Alex Sarama, I guess I'm a little biased only in the sense that, here's a dude that nobody really knew about and should have. And now a lot of people know about him. So, maybe that's one of the best things. Like everyone from Zico to Alan Keane, and, maybe you guys followed them on social media before, but now you kind of get a feel for kind of how deep some of these people are thinking around the world that, just like us, love basketball and love diving deep into it. And I just think that's been really cool, that connection that people have made with people. And I know all those coaches have just been well received by people reaching out to them, and that's been a lot of fun too. Coach, I'm not sure if you've touched on this topic in a podcast, but what is your philosophy on timeouts and halftime talks? What is your structure for those? This is a great topic. The hard part about this one is who do I ask these questions to? But let me, maybe I'm going to write that down here. And maybe as I come up, I have a few European coaches coming on and a few, I think, NBA assistants coming on, possibly another NBA head coach coming up real quick. And these might be really good questions for them to ask or to answer because they can add to it. But here's my philosophy on timeouts. Timeouts are pretty simple. First 15, 20 seconds is the players, don't concentrate, get water, do whatever you need. Don't worry about anything, just chill. And then coaches and I would talk or not talk. Again, it was just, that's players' time. And then I would come in and I'd say, okay, listen up. Okay, listen up is the cue to players to focus. And then all the players, not just the players on the floor who would be sitting down in the in the 5-seat chairs, but everyone would be responsible for focus right then. And then, and again, I'm not naive. I know some of them still wouldn't focus, but that's the idea. And then from there, it's really me trying to either solve a problem or provide advantage is the easiest way to say it. solve a problem, provide an advantage. Those are the goals. And I think you only have time for one or two, of those things. Sometimes it would be a play that creates an advantage. Sometimes it would be solve a problem. Listen, we're going to change ball screen defense, or, we got to do something different. We try to, but I'm still a coach, and we try to stay away from the generic, hey, we got to rebound harder. We got to play harder. Like, we tried to give them specificity of action, give them something actionable. And I was always very conscious of that. And I would have an assistant coach when he was there, would always kind of turn to him and say, okay, did we give them something actionable? Because that's part of it. And I would say halftime is exactly the same. I think halftime is way too long, first of all, but we would let our players go. Usually I didn't meet with, if it was 15-minute halftime, I didn't go talk to my players till about 8 minutes. And winning or losing, there are very few times where I talked very long in halftime. If I was particularly frustrated with something, I would change it, and I would change it up on them. Like, as much as, you like routine, I think sometimes you can shock them a little bit more, not with even throwing chairs or losing your mind, but just they're used to me coming in about 8 minutes and them going out about 5 minutes to get warm up for the second half. So I'd be in there for less than 3 minutes, probably talking, again, focusing on maybe 3 things. But sometimes I would just follow them in. And if I wanted to get a point across real quickly about something, I would follow them in. I tried as much as possible to not let emotion guide halftime. Like, almost everything would be pre-cleared. I'd turn to an assistant and say, hey, listen, it'd be really planned. Hey, do these guys need a little shock? Do these guys need, confidence boost? What do these guys need? And then generally they would have a feel for it, or, be a consensus on what it would be. Good topic though. I'm going to add that to a list of asking some coaches. Matchups. How much do you look at that from the offensive side of things? Individual matchups to potentially take advantage of. So Jason, if I'm understanding it, we're on offense. How much am I worried about my team's matchup in terms of we have a player that's outstanding, or how much are we attacking the weak defender? Because it's two parts to that, right? Like, are we going to focus on getting it to our best player regardless of who is covering them? A la Kawhi Leonard. Like, they can put their best defender on them. It doesn't matter. They're still going to get Kawhi Leonard the ball, right? That's not going to change their philosophy. We still want to get our best player the ball. Or are we going to hunt a particular matchup regardless of the player on offense? And I would say there's parts to both of that, but generally we would try, like in the NBA, to try and get that weak defender switched onto a better offensive player if they were hiding them. Again, really hard, easy in principle, really hard in reality. So I would say very rarely would we break out of what we do to attack a weak matchup unless it was an obvious and easy advantage. And I'm going to have this edit done before your seasons. If you're coaching in the fall, I apologize if you're coaching through the summer, I might not have it done. But this really cool way, which come back to, I would run this more. If I coach Windsor next year, I would run this more because it's so simple way to be able to attack and hide an offensive player, which means you're hiding a defender. And we basically made it 4-on-4 a lot. And when I have this edit, I'll post it, and then I will make it a masterclass, definitely a masterclass, because there's so many options and variations off of this as well. So Coach Batista just reminded me that Alan Keane talked a lot about halftime, great halftime speech on the podcast. He talked about that too. And he gets a lot of that from Mark Bennett. So if you want to go look at Mark Bennett, which is PDS coaching, I believe, go look at some of his stuff. He talks about that as well. The general thing I've read is that from a lot of professional players, but there was one particular one, I can't remember the player, but he was a European soccer player, played in the Premier League, and he wrote a whole kind of essay on how useless halftime talks are as a player, which I believe. I do believe to a certain extent they're kind of useless for a player. And more is, again, just mindset and getting them back focused on the things you're going to do. So, coaches, this is awesome. Thank you. I mean, first of all, awesome to have so many coaches on. This is one of the most well-attended in a long time, so great to have you here. The open Q&As seem to be good, so we're going to keep some of those going. I'm going to mix in a few specific topics here and there. But on any of these podcasts, you're allowed to take me on a tangent at any point. hopefully related somewhat to the topic, but I'm happy to do that as well. And thank you for joining us. And I appreciate all your efforts in our community as well and sharing the game. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.